The air in Latoile was a carefully composed symphony of hushed whispers, the delicate chime of silver on porcelain, and the low, resonant hum of lives far more gilded than her own. Clara felt the weight of it all settle on her shoulders, a beautiful, suffocating cloak. She smoothed the silk of her red dress, a splash of defiant hope against the cream and gold of the restaurant. It was a dress she'd saved for, a dress that had cost more than her weekly groceries, purchased for a night that was supposed to be a turning point. In her small clutch, nestled beside a tube of lipstick she'd reapplied 3 times in the lobby restroom, was a single $50 bill. It was her safety net, her emergency fund, her quiet admission that she was still a woman who had to think about such things, even on a night meant for fantasy. Her blind date, a man named Mark whose voice on the phone had sounded warm and steady, was 20 minutes late, then 30. At the 45-minute mark, a small, cold stone of certainty began to form in her stomach. He wasn't coming. The waiter, a man with a professionally serene face, had already refilled her water glass twice. His movements a masterclass in polite inquiry. Each time he approached, Clara offered a small, tight smile that felt increasingly brittle. She was an installation in the corner of the room, the woman waiting. She could feel the peripheral glances of other diners, the soft pity or faint curiosity that slid over her before moving on. The red dress, once a beacon of confidence, now felt like a spotlight on her foolishness. Humiliation was a slow, creeping cold, seeping through the silk. She should leave, just stand up, nod to the waiter, and walk out into the crisp night air. But the thought of that walk of shame, past the maitre d', past the softly lit tables of happy couples, was paralyzing. It felt like a public surrender. So she stayed. She would order something, she decided. One small, inexpensive thing. A bowl of soup, perhaps. An appetizer. Something to legitimize her presence, to transform her from a woman who had been stood up into a woman dining alone. It was a fragile piece of dignity, but it was all she had. She signaled the waiter, her hand trembling slightly. As he approached, her gaze drifted past him to a table set for one, occupied by a man of quiet, immense stillness. He was dressed in traditional Arab attire, a pristine white thobe and gutra, the fabric catching the soft chandelier light. He hadn't been looking at her, not directly, but she felt his awareness, a calm, neutral presence in the sea of her anxiety. He met her eyes for a fraction of a second, a glance devoid of pity or judgment, holding only a quiet observation before he returned his attention to the small cup of coffee before him. That brief, steadying look was enough. Clara took a breath, her resolve hardening. She would not crumble here. She ordered the wild mushroom risotto, a modest choice from a menu where entrees soared into triple digits. She would eat slowly, savor it, and then pay with her $50 bill, hoping it would be enough to cover the dish, a small tip and her fractured pride. The risotto was exquisite, each bite a small, earthy comfort. Clara ate with deliberate slowness, making it last. She focused on the texture, the flavor, the warmth of the bowl in her hands. It became a meditation, a way to block out the empty chair across from her and the sympathetic glances she still felt like tiny pinpricks on her skin. When she was finished, she placed her fork and knife neatly together on the plate, a final, small act of composure. She caught the waiter's eye and made a small gesture, the universal sign for the check. This was the final hurdle. The walk to the register, the careful counting of her money, the hope that she wouldn't be short. The waiter returned a moment later and placed a black leather folder on her table. "From the gentleman at the corner table," he said in a low, discreet voice, nodding almost imperceptibly towards the man in white. "He asked that you have a pleasant evening." Clara stared at the folder, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She slowly opened it. There was no bill inside, only a small, thick card from the restaurant, and on it, in elegant, flowing script, was a single sentence. Dignity should never have a price. Her breath hitched. She looked up, her eyes immediately finding him. He was watching her now, his expression unreadable but for a profound gentleness in his dark eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if to confirm the message. The gesture was not one of charity. It felt like one of solidarity, of quiet understanding. For a moment, she was frozen, caught between the sting of her earlier humiliation and the overwhelming warmth of this unexpected, anonymous kindness. The waiter had already moved away, leaving the decision entirely to her. She could simply leave, accepting the gift and disappearing into the night. Or she could do what her heart was compelling her to do. Clutching the small card, she stood up on unsteady legs and walked towards his table. His name was Tariq. He rose as she approached, a gesture of old-world courtesy that felt both formal and deeply respectful. He was taller than she had realized, with a presence that was commanding yet serene. "Please," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone with a soft accent. "You did not have to." Clara's own voice was tight with emotion when she spoke. I don't know what to say. Thank you. You have no idea what that meant." She held up the card, her fingers tracing the elegant script. This was incredibly kind. He looked at the card, then back at her, and a small, almost shy smile touched his lips. "It is an unforgivable offense to allow a beautiful woman in a red dress to feel anything less than magnificent." The compliment was delivered so simply, so sincerely, that it disarmed her completely. It wasn't a line. It was a statement of fact, as if he were merely commenting on the weather. "I must repay you," she insisted, her hand going to her clutch. It was a foolish gesture. Her $50 was a pittance in a place like this, but the need to restore some semblance of balance was overwhelming. He gently raised a hand, stopping her. "No. That would defeat the purpose." "The purpose?" she asked, confused. "To offer a moment of peace without expectation," he explained. "Some things in life should simply be gifts. Your meal is one of them. Please, accept it as such." There was no condescension in his tone, only a quiet authority that was impossible to argue with. He was not a savior swooping in. He was a man who had seen a crack in the universe and had quietly, gracefully, sealed it shut. Clara felt the tension in her shoulders finally release, replaced by a wave of gratitude, so profound it almost brought tears to her eyes. "My name is Clara," she said, extending her hand. He took it, his grip warm and firm. "I am honored to meet you, Clara. I am Tariq." They stood there for a moment, a silent understanding passing between them. He had not just paid for her meal. He had seen her, truly seen her, in her moment of deepest vulnerability and had responded not with pity, but with grace. He had restored the dignity the empty chair had tried to steal. "Well, Tariq," she said, finally finding a real smile. "Thank you for saving my evening." "It was my pleasure," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I hope the rest of your night is as lovely as you are." She walked out of Latoile not with the sting of rejection, but with the bewildering, radiant warmth of a stranger's decency lighting her way. The city felt different on her walk home. The streetlights cast a softer glow. The sounds of traffic seemed less jarring. The memory of Tariq's quiet gesture replayed in her mind, a stark contrast to the hollow echo of Mark's absence. It was an act so out of step with the transactional nature of the world she knew. He had asked for nothing, not even her name, until she offered it. He had simply acted, discreetly and decisively, to mend a stranger's wounded pride. Clara lived a careful, structured life. As a freelance editor and part-time librarian, her finances were a meticulously balanced equation. Surprises were usually of the unpleasant variety. A sudden bill, a computer crash, a client paying late. A surprise like this, one of pure, unadulterated kindness, felt like a glitch in the system, a beautiful anomaly. She spent the next few days in a haze of wonder. She would be shelving books at the library and find her thoughts drifting to his calm, dark eyes. She would be editing a manuscript and see the elegant script from the card in her mind's eye. The encounter had unsettled her in the best possible way, reminding her that there was a capacity for grace in the world that she had long forgotten to look for. A week later, seeking the comfort of routine, she was in her favorite neighborhood bakery, a small, cozy place called the Daily Need. It was her sanctuary, a place of warm smells and quiet corners where she could read for hours with a single cup of coffee. As she stood in line, deciding between a croissant and a scone, a familiar low voice spoke from behind her. "The almond croissant is excellent here." Clara turned, her heart giving a sudden, sharp leap. It was Tariq. He was dressed not in the formal thobe, but in a simple, well-tailored dark sweater and trousers. Without the trappings of his culture, he looked different, softer, more approachable, yet no less dignified. A genuine, warm smile spread across his face as he saw her recognize him. "Clara, what a wonderful coincidence." "Tariq?" she breathed, a smile blooming on her own face, unbidden and bright. I can't believe it. What are you doing here?" "I am staying nearby," he said. "My assistant recommended this place for having the best coffee in the area." He was not wrong. It felt surreal, seeing him here in her world, in her quiet corner of the city. He didn't belong to the hushed grandeur of Latoile. He was here, among the scent of baking bread and the clatter of ceramic mugs. He insisted on buying her coffee and the almond croissant he'd recommended. This time, she didn't protest. It felt different now, less like a grand gesture and more like a simple, friendly one. They found a small table by the window, the morning sun streaming in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The awkwardness of their first meeting melted away, replaced by an easy curiosity. He asked about her work, and his eyes lit up with genuine interest when she described her love for books and the quiet satisfaction of shaping a sentence. He listened with an intensity that made her feel fascinating. "A keeper of stories," he mused, leaning back in his chair. That is a noble profession. She, in turn, learned that he was in the city for several weeks, overseeing the establishment of a new international branch of his family's philanthropic foundation, one focused on arts and education grants. He spoke of it with passion, but without a hint of ego. He spoke of architecture and poetry with the same reverence he spoke of business and finance. He was a man of contrasts, of immense wealth and simple tastes, of quiet authority and gentle humility. He never once mentioned the money or status that so clearly surrounded him. He was just Tariq, a man who appreciated good coffee and a well-told story. They began to meet regularly, sometimes at the bakery, other times for walks in the park as the autumn leaves turned from green to gold. Each meeting was a slow, careful unwrapping of layers. Clara, who had built walls around her heart after a difficult divorce, found them slowly dissolving without her even noticing. Tariq was a patient and observant companion. He noticed the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was deep in thought, the way her eyes would light up when she talked about a book she loved. He learned that her quietness was not shyness, but a deep-seated thoughtfulness. She learned that his stillness was not aloofness, but a profound sense of peace. He never pushed, never pried. He simply created a space of such profound safety that she found herself wanting to share the parts of herself she had long kept hidden. He made her feel that her modest life was not something to be ashamed of, but something to be admired for its resilience and quiet beauty. He saw strength where she had only ever seen struggle. One evening, after a walk along the river as dusk painted the sky in shades of lavender and rose, Clara found herself doing something incredibly brave. "I still feel I owe you for that dinner," she began, her voice a little shaky. "I know you said not to repay you, but I'd like to." "Not with money." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression patient. "I'd like to cook you dinner," she said, the words rushing out before she could lose her nerve. "At my apartment. It's nothing like Latoile. Small and simple, but it would mean a lot to me." His smile was immediate and incredibly gentle. "Clara," he said, his voice soft, "I would be honored." The relief that washed over her was dizzying. His acceptance was another gift, another quiet validation. Her small apartment, which she often saw through a lens of its shortcomings, the slightly peeling paint near the window, the worn spot on the rug, suddenly felt like a place worthy of a guest. It was a place she could offer, a part of her world she could finally share with him. The night he came for dinner was charged with a soft, nervous energy. Clara had spent the day cleaning and cooking, filling her small space with the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary. She wore a simple blue dress, a comfortable contrast to the bold red of their first meeting. When she opened the door, Tarek stood there holding a single, perfect white orchid in a simple pot. "A small gift for your home," he said, handing it to her. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small living room not with intimidation, but with a quiet warmth. He looked around, his gaze taking in her overflowing bookshelves, the collection of mismatched teacups on a floating shelf, the framed print of a Van Gogh painting she adored. "Your home is like you," he said softly, looking back at her. Full of stories and warmth throughout the evening, the last of her defenses crumbled. They sat at her small kitchen table, the one she'd bought at a thrift store and repainted herself, and it felt more intimate and real than the grandest table at Latoile. They talked for hours. She told him about her ex-husband, about the slow process of rebuilding her life and her confidence. He listened without judgment, offering not advice, but a deep, empathetic silence that made her feel heard in a way she hadn't been in years. In turn, he spoke of his own life, of the immense pressures and responsibilities that came with his family name. He spoke of a deep-seated loneliness that often accompanied his position, a world where motives were always questioned and genuine connection was rare. In her small, simple apartment, surrounded by her books and her quiet life, he was not a sheikh or a businessman. He was just Tarek, a man who felt the weight of his world. "With you," he confessed, his voice low as he looked at her across the table. "I do not feel I have to perform. I can simply be." The admission hung in the air between them, shimmering with unspoken emotion. In that moment, the balance between them shifted forever. He was no longer the benefactor and she the recipient of his kindness. They were two people who had found a rare and precious sanctuary in each other's company. After dinner, as they washed the dishes together, their hands brushing in the warm, soapy water, the quiet intimacy was palpable. When it was time for him to leave, he paused at the door. He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. "Thank you, Clara," he whispered. "For this. This was worth more than 1,000 meals at Latoile." He leaned in and pressed a soft, chaste kiss to her forehead before turning and walking away, leaving her standing in the doorway, her heart full to bursting. Their time together became a precious, finite resource. Tarek's business in the city was drawing to a close, and the day of his departure loomed. The knowledge settled between them, a bittersweet ache that underscored the sweetness of their remaining days. They never spoke of it directly, but it was there in the way their hands lingered a little longer when they said goodbye, in the way their conversations would sometimes fall into a profound, shared silence. Clara found herself caught in a painful paradox. Every moment with him deepened her feelings, which in turn magnified the impending pain of his absence. He had become an integral part of her life, a steady, warm presence that made everything feel brighter. The thought of her world without him in it was like imagining the sun disappearing from the sky. He had reawakened a part of her she thought was long dormant, the capacity for hope, the belief in profound connection. To lose that now felt unbearable. The evening before he was due to fly home, he took her to a small, quiet jazz club. The music was melancholic and beautiful, a perfect soundtrack to their unspoken farewell. In the dimly lit room, seated at a small table, he finally broke the silence. "I am leaving tomorrow morning," he said, his voice heavy. "I know," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the condensation trailing down her water glass. "Clara," he said, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. His touch was warm and grounding. "This time we have had. It has been one of the most genuine and meaningful periods of my life." Tears pricked her eyes, and she fought to keep them at bay. "For me too," she managed to say, her voice thick. "I don't want this to be the end," he continued, his grip tightening on her hand. "But I must return. My family, my work, my life is there," she nodded, understanding. His world was one of palaces and boardrooms, of familial duty and immense responsibility. Her world was one of library cards and manuscripts, of quiet streets and a small, cozy apartment. The distance between them wasn't just geographical. It was cultural, experiential, a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. He gave her a small, velvet box. Inside was a simple, elegant silver fountain pen. "So you can continue to write stories," he said. "And so you can write to me." The next few months were a study in longing. Clara poured herself into her work, the silver pen a constant, talismanic presence on her desk. They wrote to each other long, descriptive emails at first, which soon gave way to nightly phone calls that spanned continents and time zones. The distance, instead of weakening their bond, seemed to distill it to its purest form. Stripped of physical presence, they connected through words, through shared thoughts and vulnerabilities. She told him about her daily triumphs and frustrations. He told her about the intricate politics of his work and the quiet moments he stole for himself to read the books she recommended. He sent her pictures of the desert at sunset. She sent him pictures of the first snow blanketing the trees in her park. They were building a bridge across the ocean, one conversation at a time. Through their talks, she began to understand the true nature of his life. He was a man constrained by tradition and duty, yet possessed of a deeply modern and compassionate soul. And she realized that her quiet, simple life, which she had once seen as a limitation, was a source of strength and clarity that he admired. One evening, during a call, his voice was different, more serious, more resolute. "Clara," he said, "I have been thinking, this is not enough. Writing, talking. It is a beautiful shadow, but I want the substance." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I am coming back," he said simply. "Not for business. Not for a few weeks. I have arranged my affairs. I am coming back for you." The sheer, audacious simplicity of his declaration stole her breath. He explained that he had delegated many of his responsibilities, establishing a way to manage his foundation from abroad for extended periods. He was choosing to rearrange his entire world, to step away from the center of his universe, to be with her. It was a sacrifice so immense, a gesture so profound, it dwarfed the quiet kindness he had first shown her in the restaurant. "Are you sure?" she whispered, overwhelmed. "Clara," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I have never been more sure of anything. I found something with you that I had stopped believing existed. I will not let it go." When his plane landed 2 weeks later, Clara was waiting for him at the airport. The moment she saw him emerge through the arrival's gate, the distance and uncertainty of the past months evaporated. He was no longer a voice on the phone or a face on a screen. He was here. He walked towards her, his eyes locked on hers, and the bustling airport faded into a blur. He didn't say a word. He simply dropped his bags, wrapped his arms around her, and held her as if he would never let her go. That night, he didn't take her to a hotel. He took her back to L'Etoile. The maitre d' greeted him by name, leading them not to a regular table, but to the very same corner booth where she had once sat alone. The table was set for two, a single red rose in a slender vase at its center. Sitting across from him now, the memory of her past humiliation felt like a scene from someone else's life. The empty chair was no longer a symbol of rejection, but a space that had been waiting for him to fill it. "I wanted to rewrite our beginning," Tarek said softly, reaching for her hand across the table. "This is not the place where a kind stranger helped a woman who was stood up. This is the place where I first saw the strongest, most graceful woman I had ever known. The place where my life began to change." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I fell in love with your dignity that night, Clara. Everything since has just been me trying to be worthy of it." The words settled over her, a blanket of pure, unadulterated joy. The circle was complete. The wound had not just healed. It had become the beautiful foundational scar upon which they would build their future. In the hushed elegance of the restaurant, surrounded by the clinking of silver and soft whispers, Clara looked at the man who had seen her at her lowest and had chosen to lift her up, not out of pity, but out of a deep, abiding love. Her red dress had been a symbol of hope that night, and that hope, after a long and patient journey, had finally been answered.